brought here to Kilrush by his English father, who'd come to the town in search of work. Sometime later, his father returned to England, leaving Joe behind, and the 4-year-old was in fact taken in and raised by a local family. It was many years later that Joe's family came back here from England in search of him. Now, these days, Joe lives in Manila in the Philippines, but recently he came back to Kilrush to tell his story.
Joe Riley is something of a celebrity in Kilrush in County Clare. He's just published a book about his unusual childhood growing up in the town and how the Delucre family took him in and reared him.
I was brought to Kilrush. I was the age of 3.5 when I came here, 1946, and I came with my father. And my father worked as the project manager for Clinton's and engineering, the flour mills. That's what he did. He put in flour mills. I was very young, and I have no idea why anybody would bring a 3.5-year-old boy to a strange country and leave him with total strangers and have nobody to look after him. Because I used to wander my own little way. But we had a lot of friends, or neighbors of the Shallows, who sort of kept a little eye on me here and there, but I became a wild little boy.
Beneath the Kilrush sky, in years gone by and by, out on Erin's western shore, there's a place that I adore. My mind is
neglected by his abusive father, Joe wandered the streets of Kilrush.
I was badly beaten as a child. My father, I think in his own way, I don't think he meant to be really bad to me, but he just didn't know how to manage a 3 or 4-year-old boy.
During the day, while Joe's father worked at the mill, Joe got to know the neighbours. One in particular, Sean Delucre, promised to make him a kite.
He was going to make me this kite. So I waited outside, and Auntie May saw me. She brought me in, and I never left.
My mother said, who's that little boy? She took him in, and she just kept him. Because no one wanted him. His father had brought him over, as you know, from England. And my brother was walking with his father. And we promised him to make a kite or something for him, my brother. And Joe was waiting every day for Sean to come home from work. So my mother just took him in, and he was there for I don't know how many years.
As Joe began to spend more and more time with the Delucre family, he forgot about his mother and brothers and sisters in England.
I couldn't even remember my mother, or my brothers or sisters. I knew I had a sister, but I didn't know anything else. And in fact, I never knew anything of them. The first time I remember seeing my mother, I think I was 8 or 9 years of age.
When his father's work finished in Kilrush, he came to collect Joe to take him back to his family in England. But Joe wouldn't go.
I played a very sick boy, and I went upstairs, and I was in bed, and I was very sick, and my father came to take me back to England, and Auntie May wouldn't let me go. I was gratefully abandoned, gratefully. Believe me, I was so lucky to be brought up in Kilrush, and such a beautiful place, which was beautiful people, a wonderful place. God, I mean, I was the luckiest person alive. It was wonderful. I had instant brothers. I had all the boys and the girls, instant sisters. Had a wonderful family, and they loved me so much.
Mrs. Delucre, or Auntie May as Joe called her, even though she was no blood relation, unofficially adopted this little 4-year-old English boy. A tragedy had befallen the Delucre family some years earlier, and Joe believed he became her surrogate son.
Her son had been killed, murdered about in 1944, on the 17th of March, which is actually the cover of this book. Now, the cover of that book is Joseph. His name was Joseph. He was murdered And the boys built this in memory of him. My name was Joseph, and you couldn't tell Auntie May that I was not a reincarnation of her son, because he was Joseph, and that was it.
Lulu de Lucre is the last surviving member of the de Lucre family.
My mother loved him, and my father and my brothers. And I loved him. Well, he was my brother.
For Joe, life growing up in Kilrush was packed full of adventure.
Oh, a small town, fishing, we did everything. Where else in the world could you have had an upbringing of freedom, how safe you were, you know, the Boy Scouts, or the boats, we had a great time on the boats. I was privileged. My mother came when I was about 8 or 9 years of age. I had a terrible time, you know, when she came, because I didn't know what to call her. I didn't know what to call her, because I was always used to saying Auntie May. I'd never heard of Mum, Mama, what do I call her? I had no idea, none at all. And it was very strange to me the first time I says, Mama, because I saw a film with Hayley Mills in, and and she called her mother Mama, and I says, oh, well, it's good enough for Hayley Mills, it's good enough for me. So that's what I called her. But it was very, very strange and very tense time.
Joe's mother brought him back to England, but he only stayed a week.
I was just glad to get out of there. I was glad to get a train, glad to go.
Joe's mother agreed to let him go back on his own to Ireland, and it was to be another 6 years before his family came from England again.
I was coming home from school one day, and one of my neighbours, Sue Morris, she said to me, she said, Joe, says, you've got some visitors. I said, have I? I went home, and I went through the gate. My mother came running down the path. I mean, shook me to my boots, you know? And from that path into the kitchen, and that short walk, destroyed my whole life.
Joe went to England with his parents, but again only stayed a week. When he returned to Kilrush, Joe was very uneasy. Meeting his English family again had unsettled him.
I can remember when he came back at 15, I was in the swimming baths, and I think it was Keith, my other brother, that was with us, brought Joe to the swimming baths where he was and said, this is your brother. And I didn't, I wouldn't have even recognised him at the time. I say we had no contact at all with him, really.
Joe found it hard to settle back into life in Kilrush. After a short stay, he went back to England. Like many other young Irish boys at the time, he went to look for work. He tried a number of different jobs, but eventually trained as a nurse. Today, he lives in the Philippines with his wife and family. Writing the book was an attempt to answer some of the questions about his life.
Alan Atkins would have been the ghostwriter, as he says, for the Ghost of Kilrush. Alan had been listening for years to Joe talk of his stories of Kilrush, and he said, for God's sake, will you go away and write down a few chapters, and I'll rattle them into a book for you. So Joe basically put down the raw material. Alan pulled it together. Alan can't be with us here today. His health hasn't been great, but we send out thanks to Alan. We wish he could be here. But I know he says to anybody that reads that book, I can walk any street in that town with you, he says. I know them like the back of my hand.
Joe Riley never asked his father why he took him to Ireland and abandoned him. He says writing the book made him realise his father was jealous. Separating Joe from his mother, who loved him, meant his father had no rival for her affections.
Today is the day, I think, that we bury the ghost of Kilrush. They go to rest, and I go to rest. I'm at peace, and we're all at peace, all of us. And we're going to have one hell of a wake tonight.
A story of childhood. And that ends the programme for this evening. Do join us again at the same time on Monday next. In the meantime, of course, you'll get more stories from around the country on Shockton. That's on Sunday next, or T1 television at 5:30. Do join us again on Monday, as I say. Until then, from Kilrush and from all of us in the nationwide team, a very good evening to you. And on next Monday's programme...